The Florida sun was still blazing, but the early morning heat had eased. Tom stood by the window, his eyes fixed on the small screen of the security camera. His heart was beating faster than usual, as if warning him of something he didn't want to face. He saw his wife, Linda, standing on the tennis court at the club, racket in hand, lightly hitting the ball just like every other morning. But today, something was different. The ball wasn't just bouncing back and forth in the narrow court. It carried a vague sense of something else, as if a shadow of change had settled over the place. Linda had been playing tennis for the past 15 years, a longtime member of the club. Every morning, she stepped onto the court, immersing herself in those relaxing hours where there was nothing but the sound of the ball bouncing and casual small talk with her fellow players. But ever since Tom started installing security cameras around the house, a strange habit had begun to form in him, watching her in a way he wasn't ready to admit. What he saw on the screen wasn't just regular tennis practice. It was those moments after her session, moments she shared with a man Tom had never seen before. Who was this Charles? The question flashed in his mind for a second before the answer hit him, and a strange feeling swept over him. Charles, a new tennis buddy, a widower, was there every time she finished her session. His presence wasn't random. Tom didn't need to stretch his imagination to see it. Linda's eyes lit up every time she smiled at Charles, and the way they talked to each other felt like old friends. Each time he looked at the screen, Tom didn't just see tennis. He saw a growing distance, unspoken fractures forming a private world he was no longer part of. Linda and Tom had been together for over 20 years, a marriage that had weathered its share of ups and downs, but overall remained peaceful. Their youthful days had long passed, giving way to routines, brief conversations about work, home repairs, and financial matters. Tom may have never said it out loud, but he always felt he was the one carrying the weight of the family. And Linda, though she loved him deeply, seemed to have lost interest in their life together. The time they spent together grew scarce, while her private moments became more frequent. Every morning, Linda woke at 5 a.m. to prepare for her tennis session. This was the time she felt most free, unburdened by expectations, no longer a wife or a mother, just Linda, a woman who loved sports, who thrived in motion. It became a hard-to-break routine, a way for her to stay connected to herself. At times, she felt as if she were living in a different world, one separated from the responsibilities of family. Charles, the new tennis companion, had joined the club a few months earlier, a middle-aged man with a calm presence. But there was something quietly sad and lonely about him. Unlike Tom, who was always focused on work and family, Charles brought something fresh into Linda's life. Their connection began with casual chats after tennis, talking about strategies, shared hobbies, and eventually more personal stories. Linda never told Tom about Charles. She knew he wouldn't understand. Though she never said it aloud, she sensed that these conversations, these little post-practice meetings, had quietly become an important part of her life. Every time Charles smiled at her, she felt something deeper, a connection she could no longer find in Tom. Those seemingly harmless tennis mornings had turned into encounters, private spaces where she could just be herself, where she could feel alive and not forgotten. For Charles, those conversations were a comfort too. After losing his wife, he had fallen into a spiral of loneliness. Now, Linda was a new light in his life, someone he could confide in, someone who understood. Their relationship had slowly evolved, from simple conversations to coffee outings after practice, to secret training sessions on the court, times known only to the two of them. But neither of them realized that with every meeting, every personal story shared, they were gradually crossing a line. Their feelings were no longer just friendly. They had taken on a new color, a closeness and magnetism that, deep down, both knew meant they were stepping into the territory of betrayal. Tom had begun to sense that something was wrong. Linda's morning routine, once so familiar, now carried a strange undertone. He wasn't usually the suspicious type, but subtle changes in her behavior caught his attention. She started coming home later after practice, and sometimes she no longer shared the details of her day like she used to. They didn't talk about her club friends, the matches she played, or even the little things that used to come up in conversation. Whenever he asked about Charles, she brushed it off, her gaze quickly shifting. It wasn't like the Linda he knew, the open, warm woman who always told him everything. Still, Tom said nothing. He understood that everyone needed their own space and privacy. But what troubled him was the growing feeling of being left out of his wife's life. They used to talk after she got back from the club, sometimes have breakfast together. Now, the air between them felt cold. Tom began to feel like a stranger in his own marriage. Then one morning, while checking the security cameras, Tom stumbled upon a clip that made his heart stop. On the screen, Linda stood talking to Charles on the tennis court just after practice. There was nothing shocking about the scene at first glance. But when Tom looked closer, he saw something he couldn't ignore. The way Linda looked at Charles, the closeness in her gestures, was unlike anything he had seen in their years of marriage. A dreamy gaze, a warm smile, a casual touch of the hand. All things he had never seen between them. Tom knew what he was seeing wasn't just two tennis buddies chatting. This wasn't just about sports. This was something deeper, something that couldn't be hidden. The suspicion he'd been carrying now became a painful truth. Linda was no longer the wife he thought he knew. She had a world of her own now, one he wasn't part of. He stood there, phone in hand, eyes glued to the screen, his chest full of chaos. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed, but a part of him knew it was real. What he had discovered wasn't just about tennis. It was about a major shift in their lives. Everything had changed. This wasn't just an affair. It was a turning point in their relationship. The sting of betrayal surged through Tom, and he felt like he was standing at a crossroads, unsure of where to go next. After seeing what the security camera had captured, Tom couldn't get the images out of his head. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Linda and Charles standing close on the court, subtle gestures, effortless smiles. A part of him still couldn't accept the truth, but the pain was undeniable. He felt like he was falling into a deep abyss, where everything he had once believed in was now crumbling. In the days that followed, Tom said nothing to Linda about what he had seen. He didn't know where to begin, or how to face her. He was afraid that if he brought it up, everything would fall apart. Instead of confronting the issue, he withdrew into himself. He stopped engaging in his daily routines, stopped talking to her the way he used to. The sense of losing control overwhelmed him, as if he were standing on the outside of his own life. Tom felt like he had lost everything. Not just Linda, but a part of himself. He no longer recognized the woman he had loved, the wife he once believed would be by his side for life. The distance between them had grown too wide, and he didn't know how to bridge it. While Linda continued going to the tennis courts every morning, chatting with Charles, Tom could only stand by and watch everything slip away beyond his reach. A part of him, one he'd never voiced, began to ask questions. Had he been too rigid in their marriage? Had his emotional distance over the years pushed Linda to look elsewhere for understanding and connection? Those questions circled endlessly in his mind, building a tension he couldn't release. That day, when Tom returned to the room where the security monitor was set up, he realized he could no longer look at the screen the way he once had. What used to be a source of reassurance, of being in control, now only brought him pain. He didn't want to see anymore, but he couldn't stop watching either. Every glance at the screen made him feel like an outsider, powerless against the tide of betrayal. A storm churned inside him, anger, disappointment, and regret for not protecting the relationship they once had. His feelings for Linda had changed. It was no longer a simple love, but something riddled with questions about trust and connection. And through it all, he couldn't shake the sense that he had lost something deeply important. He hadn't just lost his bond with his wife. He'd lost the illusion of control he once held over his life. Tom knew he couldn't stay silent forever. For days, he'd thought of nothing but Linda, her connection with Charles, and how he'd seen everything through such a narrow lens. Every time he looked into her eyes now, he felt like he no longer knew her. The distance between them had been building for a long time, but now it had turned into a solid wall he couldn't break through. Finally, one evening, when he could no longer bear the weight of it, Tom decided he had to confront Linda. They sat down at the dinner table like they always used to, but the atmosphere was completely different. Linda seemed to sense the change in his demeanor, though she said nothing. The soft light from the table lamp cast a heavy mood over the room, as if it were bearing witness to a confrontation neither of them could avoid. Tom began in a dry, brittle voice, so unlike his usual tone. "Linda, we need to talk." Linda looked up at him, her eyes unblinking but cautious, as if she had been preparing for this moment all along. She didn't know exactly what Tom had discovered, but the silence between them had lasted long enough to make her certain something was wrong. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Tom looked at her, took a deep breath, trying to hold back his emotions. He didn't want his anger to take over, but the pain was rising too fast to contain. "I saw what happened on the tennis court, Linda. I saw you with Charles." Linda didn't speak right away. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Eventually, she looked down, unsure of how to begin. She knew her silence couldn't hide the truth any longer. "Tom, I don't know what to say," Linda began, her voice frail. "I never meant to hurt you, but I also can't keep living in a marriage where I don't feel like myself anymore." Her words struck Tom like a punch to the chest. He was stunned. "I haven't paid enough attention to you, have I?" Tom asked, his voice cracking. "You needed space to find yourself, and I never saw it. But this I can't accept." Linda lowered her head, tears starting to fall. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Tom. I just needed someone to talk to, someone who understood me. I didn't think it would end up hurting you like this." Tom couldn't hold it in anymore. He stood up and began pacing the room, a wave of frustration crashing inside him. He didn't know if he was angrier at her or at himself. "And you never once thought of me?" he shouted. "I'm your husband, Linda. I've been here all these years, and you found comfort in the arms of another man. Did I ever cross your mind?" Linda stood, slowly moving closer, her hands trembling. "I didn't want to hurt you. I've tried, Tom. I really have. But sometimes, just a little closeness, a little feeling of being seen, is enough to make someone feel alive again. I'm not trying to justify myself. I didn't know what else to do." They stood facing each other, a chasm between them that neither knew how to cross. Tom could hear the pain in her voice, but the anger and betrayal inside him were too strong. Part of him wanted to forgive her, but another part simply couldn't accept what had happened. In the end, they just stood there, saying nothing. All that remained was a heavy silence, an emotional void that no words could fill. The confrontation between Tom and Linda had no clear outcome. Even after their honest exchange, Tom's anger didn't subside, and Linda could only stand there, helpless in the face of such raw emotion. That night, they didn't eat dinner together. They didn't speak again. Tom retreated to his own room, and so did Linda. The air in the house felt suffocating and tense, like an invisible curtain now separated the two of them. The next morning, Linda woke up early as usual, preparing for her tennis session. But this time, the excitement was gone. Everything had changed. The sense of isolation and emotional distance from Tom made her feel like a stranger in her own life, like she was no longer herself. She looked in the mirror, her eyes slightly red from crying the night before. Everything felt blurry now, and she felt, more than ever, that she had lost her way in her own life. Meanwhile, Tom didn't go out like he usually did. He stayed in his room, trying to piece everything together. The images of Linda and Charles on the tennis court, their conversations, her laughter, felt like knives twisting in his heart. He couldn't forgive easily. He wanted to preserve the family, but he also couldn't keep living in a relationship where he no longer felt central. A sense of helplessness consumed Tom. He could no longer control anything, not even himself. Chaotic thoughts, the sting of betrayal, the weight of disappointment. All of it wore down his faith in their marriage. At the same time, after her tennis session, Linda stood outside the club, gazing into the distance as if lost in thought. Her conversations with Charles had become an integral part of her life. But those encounters also made her feel guilty, like she was flirting with betrayal. She realized there was no clear boundary between friendship and something more, and she was beginning to understand that she'd crossed lines she hadn't meant to cross. Never before had the line between love and betrayal felt so fragile. The meetings with Charles, the conversations she had once seen as harmless comfort, had become something she could no longer control. And she couldn't deny that there were moments when she felt closer to Charles than to Tom. Even though she still loved Tom and still wanted to save their marriage, she began thinking about everything that had happened, about the moments that couldn't be undone. She didn't know what to do anymore. Could she go back and start over with Tom? Or had the relationship ended long ago without her realizing it? A sense of being lost and uncertain about the future weighed heavily on her. A few days later, Tom and Linda saw each other again. But this time, they didn't talk about Charles or their relationship. They sat in silence. And in that silence, they both understood that everything had changed for good. There were no more intimate conversations, no more closeness. They both knew their lives had diverged, and maybe there was no way back. After a long stretch of silence and tension, Tom and Linda finally realized they couldn't go on like this. They no longer looked at each other with affection, but they also couldn't deny that their feelings hadn't completely disappeared. They both understood that their relationship was hanging by a thread. But was it salvageable? Though still in pain, Tom knew that if he didn't do something to change their situation, they would just keep sinking deeper into disappointment. He decided he needed to face the reality of it all, as hard as that would be. After many sleepless nights, he came to an important decision. Not silence, not confrontation, but time. Tom needed time to make sense of his feelings and to figure things out for himself. During that same period, Linda wrestled with a storm of mixed emotions. She knew she couldn't continue her connection with Charles, but she also couldn't return to a life devoid of the understanding and connection she had found in those conversations. Still, Linda knew she needed to rediscover herself, and maybe Tom did too. She decided to give them both space, not to forget, but to better understand their feelings and the relationship she wasn't yet ready to give up on. One summer morning, Tom stood on the tennis court, gazing at the fresh green grass under the sunlight. This was where he and Linda had shared so many years together, memories, jokes, and laughter. But now the court no longer felt like a place of closeness. Instead, it was a mirror, reflecting back to him his own mistakes and pain. He understood that no matter what happened, life had to go on, and he needed to change how he viewed their relationship. Linda, too, began her mornings in silence. She no longer went to the tennis club. Instead, she took time to reflect on what she'd done, on the moments when she no longer felt like herself. She no longer wanted to live in uncertainty or with lingering guilt, and she knew what she had to do to move forward. Both Tom and Linda needed time to heal, to rebuild the trust that had been lost. During this time, they both understood one thing. They might never return to what they once were, but if they wanted to stay together, they would have to cross over the blurred boundaries and start rebuilding from scratch. Whether or not their relationship could be saved remained uncertain. But they knew this journey would require patience and time. In the weeks that followed, Tom and Linda lived like two housemates, taking cautious steps and speaking with measured words. There were no more mornings filled with laughter or long conversations after dinner. They no longer lived like a true couple, but like two strangers sharing a space, unable to find real connection. Still, that silence wasn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it was part of the process of rediscovery that both of them needed. During this time, Tom began to understand that what he truly needed wasn't a perfect life, but honesty and patience. He realized Linda's absence had given him a chance to reflect on what he had overlooked. The small conversations, the everyday gestures, and the little joys they once shared. He had taken those for granted, and now he regretted his neglect. Linda, meanwhile, began to see the importance of rebuilding boundaries in her relationship with Tom. The emotions she had found in her talks with Charles weren't a substitute for real marriage. She realized that she had let things go too far, that she had let emotions override reason and lost sight of the values she once held dear. Linda began to accept that, as difficult as it was, she needed to face the reality of the lines she had crossed. One morning, just as the sun was rising, Tom decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. He had no particular destination. He just wanted to let his mind wander. Meanwhile, Linda was walking through a nearby park, deep in thought. They happened to cross paths in a quiet corner of the park, a place they never expected to meet again like this. Tom looked at Linda with new eyes. The morning light gave the space a sense of calm, and in that moment he felt a shift. Linda was no longer the stranger he had once felt betrayed by, nor was she the perfect wife he had once dreamed of. She was Linda, a woman who had made mistakes, but who also longed deeply to be loved and respected. Linda also looked at Tom, but this time, she didn't feel any anxiety. Instead, there was a gentle, natural feeling between them. Although the silence remained, it wasn't the tense or fearful kind. It was the silence of two people trying to find their way back to each other, even if they weren't sure what the future held. "Can we try again? From the beginning?" Linda spoke, her voice soft but firm. Tom was surprised, but he could feel the sincerity in her words. He didn't answer right away. That wasn't a question he could respond to impulsively, but he felt a warmth rise in his chest. "I don't know," he said, "but maybe we need time. We both need time to learn how to face each other again, to redefine our boundaries." Linda nodded, and they continued walking side by side in silence. The distance between them was still there, but it no longer felt like an unbridgeable chasm. Slowly, they realized that even though there was no easy formula for recovery, if they truly wanted to, they could start over from small things. From conversation, from gestures of care, from mutual respect and deeper understanding. They didn't know where the relationship would go, but one thing was clear. Both Tom and Linda were willing to begin again, to take gentle steps forward, to rediscover the line between love and personal space, and to hope that the trust they'd lost could be rebuilt. Tom and Linda had started a long journey to rebuild their relationship, but things weren't as easy as they'd hoped. After months of silence and reflection, they still had to face major challenges. Change couldn't happen overnight, and the cracks in their marriage were still there, like scars that never fully healed. Even so, they both knew that effort was the only path forward, and little by little, they began to take the first steps to make amends. One afternoon, Linda was in the kitchen preparing dinner for the family. They no longer ate in silence. They had begun to talk more, though the conversations still carried a trace of caution, as if they couldn't fully trust each other yet. Tom stood in the living room watching Linda from a distance. He realized she was no longer the wife he used to have, but she also wasn't the woman who had betrayed him. She was Linda, a woman who had gone through pain and found a way to change, just as he was trying to change too. Linda turned to look at Tom and smiled. A soft, sincere smile. "Do you want to help me?" she asked, her eyes gentle. Tom nodded, walked over, and joined her in preparing the meal. They didn't need to say much, but in those small, everyday gestures, Tom realized they could begin again through the simplest things, through care, shared tasks, and being present for each other in ways they had long forgotten. Still, the conversations about Charles and Linda's meetings with him remained an open wound. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Tom decided it was time to be honest about what he had been feeling all along. "Linda," he began, "I can't say I've completely gotten over everything that happened. I still remember how I felt when I saw you with Charles. I can't help but think about what you did." Linda was silent for a moment. Then, in a calm and sincere voice, she replied, "I understand, Tom, and I'm sorry. I crossed lines I never should have, but I don't want to repeat that mistake. I don't want those feelings to linger either. I need to start over, and I hope we can do that together, no matter how hard it may be." Tom felt an odd sense of relief at those words. There was still a lot unresolved, but something inside him began to ease. It wasn't that he had forgotten everything, but he was starting to see that forgiveness is a process, and real change only happens when both people commit to working through it from the ground up. From that point on, they began to have deeper conversations, not just about mistakes and regrets, but about hopes and dreams for the future. They learned to express what they were feeling instead of bottling it up. In doing so, they gradually began to heal old wounds and rediscover the connection they had lost. Though their relationship would never be the same as it once was, and likely never would be, they both understood now that love isn't about perfection. Love is about learning, about patience and forgiveness, and more than anything, about accepting each other's flaws in order to rebuild trust. One morning, after a long time, Tom and Linda decided to return to the tennis court, a place where they had once found joy and closeness. As they stood together on the court, this time there was no tension, no heavy silence, just a fresh sense of presence. They knew their relationship wasn't a perfect story, but at the very least, they had found a way to start again. The relationship between Tom and Linda couldn't go back to what it once was. They couldn't return to the old days when everything felt easy and natural. But even so, they no longer felt lost or confused. Instead, they began to realize that living together in mutual respect and understanding meant they needed to reestablish their boundaries. What had happened couldn't be changed, but how they faced the past and the future would determine whether they could continue walking the same path. Tom was the first to realize that, in order to protect their relationship, he had to shift the way he viewed what had happened. He couldn't keep living in pain or letting the past control the present. But that didn't mean forgiveness came easily. He understood that forgiveness doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from acceptance and learning to live with what had been broken. That day, Tom sat down with Linda and spoke from the heart. "We need to talk again, Linda. Not to blame or accuse, but to clarify the things we've still left unsaid. I need to know what's really in your heart, and you need to understand what I've been feeling." Linda, though a little tense, understood this was a necessary step if they were ever going to move forward. She looked into Tom's eyes, heard the sincerity in his voice, and began to open up. "I understand, Tom, and I also know we can't move on without setting clear boundaries. What's done is done, but we can learn how to live with it and build something new together." For the first time in many months, Tom felt like he could breathe again. The questions that had weighed on him didn't feel so heavy anymore. They had finally been spoken and heard. He no longer felt like a stranger in his own home. And while nothing could erase the pain, at least now, they had truly begun again. They talked about the things that needed to change, not just in their relationship, but in how they viewed themselves and each other's boundaries. Tom shared that he needed personal space to think, to regain his sense of balance. Linda agreed, and she also felt that respecting each other's space was essential for maintaining both freedom and mutual respect. A week later, they decided to see a marriage counselor, a step they had never imagined taking before. But Linda understood that if they truly wanted to change and start over, they had to be open with each other about the deeper things, fears and worries they'd never dared to speak aloud. Tom, too, began to see that seeking help from outside was an important step in their healing journey. That first step wasn't easy. Their wounds were still tender, and the doubts and fears hadn't gone away. But one thing was clear: they were no longer standing at a crossroads. They could finally look each other in the eye instead of looking away, and both knew that their relationship would never be the same as before. It would be stronger if they were willing to change and face life's challenges together. Since they began confronting the unresolved issues between them, Tom and Linda decided to do something they never imagined before: rebuild their relationship from the ground up. But this time, not based on illusions or vague hopes, but on a real commitment to change. Their relationship couldn't return to what it once was, but what mattered was that both of them understood the need to rebuild from the most fundamental elements: respect, communication, and mutual commitment. They knew that in order to continue living together, they needed a solid foundation. And the first step was honesty. Every evening, after a long day, they would sit down, not to blame or explain, but to share what they were feeling, the things they had once ignored. Linda started telling Tom about the emotions she had been hiding all along, the guilt, the anxiety that had lived in her heart. She realized that only by being open with Tom could she find peace within herself. Tom, though still dealing with the pain that wasn't easy to let go, also began to understand that he couldn't keep harboring only negative emotions if he wanted the relationship to survive. He began to open up more, to talk about the sense of betrayal, the loss he had felt, but also the longing to be loved and respected again. In those conversations, they weren't just seeking forgiveness. They were seeking a deeper understanding of each other. Each time they shared, another part of the wall between them came down. They knew that rebuilding a relationship wasn't easy, but without openness and a willingness to change, they couldn't move forward. Tom and Linda started making small but meaningful changes in their everyday lives. Instead of losing themselves in work or routines, they made time for each other, going for walks, watching movies, or simply sharing a cup of coffee in the morning. They realized that love didn't come only from grand gestures, but from small, simple acts of care and presence. One of the most important things they agreed on was creating personal space for each person. Linda realized that lacking her own space had left her feeling suffocated, while Tom recognized that he needed time to process his emotions. They both agreed that each of them had the right to their own space, to do what they loved, and that this didn't mean emotional distance but mutual respect. They also began participating in activities together, like joining a yoga class or going on weekend trips. These moments helped them rediscover joy in each other's company, and more importantly, helped them feel like a team again, not just in marriage, but in life. From time to time, Tom and Linda still faced doubts and insecurities, but they had learned how to get through them together. They understood that in any relationship, renewal doesn't come easily or immediately. But as long as they were both committed to walking the same path, building trust step by step, their relationship had a real chance to grow stronger. One morning, standing side by side on the tennis court, they no longer felt tension or anxiety. They exchanged a confident glance, understanding that the road ahead was still long and not without obstacles. But they were ready to walk it together, not out of obligation, but because they had found a reason to keep going. Tom and Linda had been through a long journey to find each other again, but they knew that maintaining change and rebuilding trust wouldn't be easy. After all the pain, forgiveness, and healing, they began to feel a real shift, not just in their relationship, but in themselves. They were no longer strangers to each other, no longer the lost souls they'd once been. Instead, they had been reborn more mature and with a renewed sense of freedom within their relationship. Linda no longer felt shackled by guilt, and Tom no longer lived in the torment of betrayal. They had learned that freedom in a relationship doesn't mean separation or distance. It means mutual respect, allowing each other the space and time to grow. Their relationship was no longer a closed loop, but an open space where they could grow, learn, and become the best versions of themselves, while still supporting one another on that journey. One beautiful Sunday, after months of effort, Tom and Linda decided to go on a small outing nearby, something they'd never thought to do before. They weren't weighed down by past issues anymore. They simply enjoyed the moment together. They walked along forest trails, talking not about the past, but about their future plans, what they hoped to do together. Tom realized that these moments were what really mattered. Beside Linda, he no longer felt pain or inner turmoil. Instead, he felt at ease, like all the weight had been lifted. Linda, too, felt a sense of freedom in her heart. She no longer felt the need to explain or defend her past, because she had found forgiveness, not just from Tom, but from herself. Their relationship hadn't just returned. It had evolved into something deeper, a bond built on trust and mutual respect. Tom and Linda began to realize that they didn't have to be perfect to love each other. They didn't have to fit some ideal image society expected of them. What mattered was that they could be fully themselves and still love each other in all their imperfection. When they returned to the tennis court, there was no longer any tension or fear. They played with light hearts, enjoying the game, no longer burdened by the past. They understood that love isn't a straight road. It's a winding path of turns, crossroads, trials, and opportunities to grow together. And with every step they took, they found freedom, the freedom to love, the freedom to forgive, and the freedom to live their own lives. Tom and Linda didn't know what the future would hold, but they had learned that as long as they remained honest with themselves and with each other, they would find a way to move forward together. Their love, though not perfect, had been built on sincerity, persistent effort, and commitment, not just to each other, but also to themselves. Their relationship had weathered deep pain and countless challenges, but in the end, they found a path forward. The painful days were no longer just open wounds, but had become valuable lessons. Lessons about the importance of boundaries and personal space in any relationship. Tom and Linda realized that when a relationship survives a major storm, it doesn't return to how it once was, but it can emerge stronger if both people learn to respect and understand each other. Tom no longer felt haunted by Linda's betrayal. He had found a way to live with the pain, not by forgetting, but by accepting and learning how to forgive. He understood now that a relationship doesn't need to be perfect. What matters is the mutual commitment. When Linda stepped out of the shadows of guilt and found peace within herself, Tom too found relief in letting go of the past and not letting it dictate his present. Linda, after all the mistakes and guilt, finally saw that she needed to confront her own limits. She realized that having personal space wasn't some distant ideal. It was a vital part of sustaining a healthy relationship, giving each other the room to breathe, to be alone, to recharge. This was how they preserved respect and love between them. Together, they learned that to love each other in the long run, they needed clear boundaries. These weren't walls to divide them, but markers to protect the relationship, ensuring each person felt respected and free. Their relationship was no longer a space clouded by secrets, but one where they could share what truly mattered without fear or anxiety. Tom and Linda found forgiveness not just in each other, but in themselves. Whenever they sat together and looked toward the future, it wasn't about trying to restore the past. It was about building something new, a future where they could live with mutual respect and commitment. Their love didn't have to be flawless. It just had to be grounded in understanding, patience, and the acceptance of the mistakes they had survived together. As they stepped into this new phase of their relationship, Tom and Linda knew that accepting what had happened didn't mean forgetting the pain or loss. It meant learning how to live with those experiences. It wasn't always easy, but they had come to understand that self-love and self-acceptance were at the heart of healing. One evening, as they sat together in the soft glow of a table lamp, Linda looked into Tom's eyes and said quietly, "I know I hurt you, Tom, but I also know that unless we accept our mistakes and change the way we face them, we'll never be able to move forward." Tom nodded, his eyes staring into the distance, as if reflecting on everything that had brought them here. "I know that too, Linda," he replied, his voice gentle but resolute. "I can't forget what happened, but I understand that the past is a part of us. We can't change it, but how we face it will determine whether this relationship can survive. And I'm ready to move forward with you if we're truly doing this with honesty." That was the moment they understood. Love isn't a flawless process. It's a choice, one they had to make every single day, no matter the challenges. Acceptance, not blame, was the key to rebuilding their broken trust. Linda had come to see that real love wasn't about perfection or never making mistakes. It was about accepting flaws and working to do better. She no longer tried to deny or hide her past. Instead, she faced it and, alongside Tom, began the journey of healing. Not just with each other, but within herself. Tom realized that love wasn't about possession or control. It was about mutual respect. And most importantly, it was about acceptance. He no longer sought perfection in Linda. Instead, he valued their companionship, their understanding, and the way they shared the small, quiet moments of life. They had begun to love not just each other, but the imperfect parts of each other too. They understood that forgiveness wasn't easy. It was a journey. Accepting mistakes and learning to live with them was one of the most essential parts of that path. They no longer looked at each other with suspicion or resentment, but with empathy and understanding. Though their relationship could never return to what it once was, they had learned how to love each other in a new way, matured and deeper. Each day, Tom and Linda learned that love wasn't just about the sweet moments. It was about the trials they overcame together. And the more challenges they faced side by side, the stronger their bond became. They no longer feared the future but believed they could face anything, as long as they had each other, and as long as they kept choosing to accept, forgive, and love. With every step forward, they realized their relationship wasn't a destination but an ongoing journey. A life they were building together, not only through acts of affection, but through daily choices and effort. After all the pain and hardship, they had discovered how to live together through growth and change, without forgetting to honor the individual space each of them needed. While they couldn't rewrite the past, how they faced it and grew from it, that's what made all the difference. Tom and Linda no longer searched for perfection or a relationship without flaws. They found peace in embracing the imperfect. Their relationship had become a safe space where each could be fully themselves, without fear, without pretense. One morning, as they sat together on a Florida beach, Linda held Tom's hand and looked out over the ocean, feeling the peace they had earned after everything they had endured. "You know, Tom," she said softly, "we've been through so much, but it's those hardships that taught me how to truly love you. Not in perfection, but through our flaws and our unfinished parts." Tom smiled, his eyes fixed on the vast ocean before them, as if he'd finally found the answer to all the questions he'd been holding inside. "Me too, Linda. I don't need perfection. I just want us to walk this path together and keep learning how to love each other every day. What matters most is we didn't give up, and I'm grateful I still have you by my side." There were no grand words, no lofty promises. But in that moment, both Tom and Linda understood. Their relationship had become an essential part of each other's lives. The mistakes they had made were no longer burdens. They had become valuable lessons. Everything they had endured had helped them grow, not just in love, but as individuals. They both knew their relationship would never be a straight path. It would be a winding journey, full of uphill climbs and sudden turns. But what mattered was that they had chosen to keep walking it together. Not out of obligation or guilt, but because they had learned how to love and respect each other, with all that had happened and all that was still to come. With every passing day, their connection grew stronger, not just because of love, but because of the deep understanding they had for one another. Every step no longer felt like a burden, but part of a journey filled with hope, trust, and commitment. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they knew that as long as they held onto love and understanding, they could face anything together. As Tom and Linda continued their journey, they began to feel a peace in their relationship that they had never known before. They no longer carried fear about the past or anxiety about the future. The difficult days had shown them that love isn't something you can measure or control. It's a quiet strength, a deep sense of acceptance and respect that they offered each other daily. Linda had found a peaceful space within herself, no longer needing to justify or explain the choices she had made in the past. Instead, she knew now that freedom in love meant being free to live as her true self. Tom, too, had learned to forgive not just Linda but also himself. The weight of betrayal no longer consumed his thoughts. He had learned how to let go and live in the freedom of the present moment. They no longer looked at each other with suspicion or fear. Instead, every glance, every smile, was a quiet affirmation that they had made it through the worst. And now, they could love each other without carrying the past on their shoulders. Each morning, they woke up beside each other, not worried about what trial might come next, but grateful for the moment they were sharing now. Tom and Linda had stopped chasing the future, because they realized their relationship wasn't a story with a neat ending. It was an ongoing journey. Every step, every decision, was an opportunity to grow and love more deeply. Though challenges still lay ahead, they were no longer afraid. They had survived everything behind them, and that gave them the strength to face anything still to come, as long as they faced it together. Their love had become a steady flame, not something fragile or easy to extinguish, but a light that burned within them, constantly nurturing and protecting their bond. After all the storms, Tom and Linda had learned something essential: balance. A relationship can't survive on romantic love or blind sacrifice alone. It needs balance between connection and space, between personal freedom and mutual responsibility. They had come to understand that a healthy relationship isn't one without hardship, but one where both people show up, even in the hardest moments, ready to support and grow together. They didn't just learn to love each other, they learned to respect each other's boundaries. They made space for solitude where each could simply be without having to explain or justify. Tom had his own time to pursue what brought him joy: golf on the weekends, long afternoons with a good book. Linda rediscovered her passion for yoga classes and the warmth of casual evenings with friends. This didn't create distance between them. On the contrary, those separate spaces helped them understand the importance of preserving individuality while still nurturing their bond. When they were together, it wasn't out of need or dependency. It was a choice, grounded in acceptance. They had learned to be themselves with each other, not for each other. They no longer looked at each other with unrealistic expectations. Instead, They approached their relationship with empathy and compassion. They knew neither of them was perfect. And while more challenges might come, what mattered was their shared willingness to face them together. That balance between closeness and freedom helped them sustain love without pressure or strain. They saw clearly now. When personal space and connection are held in harmony, a relationship doesn't just survive, it thrives. They no longer viewed one another as something to possess, but as companions, two people walking side by side, building a shared life while honoring the quiet independence within each of them. That's when love becomes strongest. When both people can grow, support, and care for each other without losing themselves.